what do you think that atmosphere will look like?
Well, I'll tell you this. I won't be in short sleeves because I have a saying around here. I said there's no such thing as a cold, tough guy, right? You're either warm or you're cold, right? One or the other.
Hello and welcome. It's Always College Football. We are back after a bit of a hiatus. Had kind of a long break there, but we didn't feel like it was appropriate to do a transfer portal show at the end of last week when the transfer portal was very much in flux. Yeah, guys did make some adjustments. Guys made some commitments, but it didn't make a lot of sense because it was ever changing. You hear a buzz, teams are going this guy's going this way. It's hard to keep up with. So we figured we're better off updating it once a week. We'll do it on Mondays and we'll keep you posted with the latest movement. There are a couple things that have gone down so far, and it is somewhat interesting identifying a couple trends. We also have not had a chance to really react strongly to the news that Bill Belichick has become the head coach of the North Carolina Tar Heels. I have some thoughts on that. We did hint at it, that it was going in that direction a couple weeks ago. That was what our sources were telling us. I just still, even as late as the hour before it was announced, still had a hard time believing it, taking everything into account. And then we also are going to kind of set the table for what's coming this week with a terrific conversation with the head coach of the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, Marcus Freeman. So we look forward to that. We'll kick things off there, heading to South Bend, where we'll talk with Marcus Freeman. But he's the head coach at Notre Dame. He's Marcus Freeman. They are on the heels of a 10-game win streak. And what a feeling it must be around South Bend knowing that a home game is heading in your direction. Coach, when you saw the announcement, what was the initial reaction?
Well, I think for us, after the USC game, we knew we were in position to have a home playoff game. We just didn't know who our opponent was. And I think we had a good idea where we would have be seated after Texas was ranked fifth or seated fifth, because it showed that the committee wasn't going to, put those guys lower because they lost the championship game. So I think at that moment he said, okay, we're going to probably be seventh. We just didn't know our opponent. And when they announced Indiana, more than anything, it was a little bit of sigh of relief in terms of direction. Right? Like, okay, now we know who we're going to play. We can really prepare now moving forward. And so we're looking forward to the opportunity, Greg.
Well, every other team in front of you, all six had a game as far as seeding is concerned, had a game the previous week. I would imagine you knew you were in, so that was comforting. But did you have to at any point resist the urge to start diving into a team that you thought you might be playing against to get a bit of a head start? Was that because I would have been bored to death, I guess, and also a little bit unsettled. But I know you guys have a million things going on with signing day in the portal and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think we have a group that was able to kind of do initial scouting reports just on all the possible teams we may face. But when you tried to figure it out yourself, there was too many scenarios. Like if this team loses, who would we play? And, what I really wanted our entire program to do was take a week and really use it as a bye week to refresh, to reload, to not worry about the pressures of having an opponent. And so we did. We obviously worked out, we practiced, but I didn't want to have the added stress of thinking about an opponent. And it was something that was good for our entire program.
The season's so long, and it's such a ridiculously challenging journey. And I know this year's a little unique with multiple buys in the regular season, and you've dealt with that before, having played in week 0. It's not that uncommon. You did not play, nor do you ever play in a conference championship setting. So knowing that you could have 4 more games sitting right in front of you, did you resist the urge to maybe press the guys too early? So you said you treat it like a bye week. Well, you can treat a bye week one of 2 different ways. You can, hey, this is like camp practice all over again, which I know you as a linebacker probably loved. I as a quarterback, not so fond of it. But did you treat it more like camp practice, or did you treat it more like rest and recovery, let's get back on track type of practice?
Yeah, we really we practiced one time last week. And they worked out, they lifted, the players ran just to make sure we keep our conditioning where it needs to be. But I really wanted them to decompress. And I wanted our coaches to get a chance to reset. We had signing day on Wednesday, and I think it was important for us to truly press the reset button and come back this week fresh. And so this is the week that you got to be smart, because you're going to have your typical Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday practice. So 3 good practices, but you also know in another 5 days you're going to start over. And what you don't want to do is get to the point where you're just overloading your players, right? And you're physically having, bad returns. And we got to make sure we're very smart on how we're practicing. It's week 13 and it's not week 1 of the season. And so we got to make sure we're strategic in how we're preparing, but we got to make sure we're prepared.
Well, in most bowl practices, there's an emphasis on getting younger players reps to accelerate development. And with opt-outs, that's become more manageable. But in playoff practice, knowing that it's usually, or at least this is the first year of the 12 team, you usually have 4 weeks. So you can accelerate the development of the young players and then still have time to implement the game plan. You don't have that luxury with this condensed calendar. So I'm not saying you're necessarily foregoing that opportunity to develop, but how do you try to balance that?
We were able to get we had a young guy scrimmage on Saturday, and it was really something our captain said they wanted. I didn't have it originally planned, and the captain said, "Coach, we got to get our young guys out there and let them scrimmage a little bit." So we did that on Saturday. A lot of those guys that were in that scrimmage are going to be on scout team, right? And so although they're maybe not doing the travel team, the defense or offense, but they're getting valuable reps in terms of scout team reps. And what we do here is we watch our scout team reps. I'm involved with the scout team, and we make sure our guys are better because of it. And I think that's how we got to focus as we move forward.
Yeah, it's gonna be a lot of fun. And I think that your team. I've told you when we called the Navy game, I'm so impressed with the bounce back. And how many teams have we seen this year have a tough day at the office? Everybody, almost everyone in the field except for one team. And even they had a tough challenge against Wisconsin. So you look at the response that you've had in the last 10 wins and how the captains have kind of come together and how you have established a clear identity. What do you attribute that to, knowing that the guy that is leading the ship offensively has been there for less than a calendar year? And then defensively, you had so many great leaders depart off last year's roster. So where'd you find that leadership on the roster?
I think you really had to find the leadership when you were at your lowest moments, right? And you lose to Northern Illinois, and the noise is loud, right? And it's not what you want to hear. And so we really had to make sure our leaders were implementing the message that I wanted, and make sure these guys are really focused on improving. Right? We talk a lot about elevating here and the hard work that it takes to elevate. And as you look back, you say, man, from Northern Illinois to now, we've improved tremendously. But what have we done? We've continued to work tirelessly and prepare the right way and really be intentional about ways to expedite that process. But there is no easy answer. There's no quick fix. It's intentional hard work, but it's also the right mindset that you're never too high after a win and you're never too low after a loss. You're upset when you lose, but you have to use that as motivation to put the work in. And then you often will hear me say, we got to keep the pain. We got to remember what is the result of not preparing the right way, right? There is cause and effect. There are reasons why we failed versus Northern Illinois. And we got to make sure that we never allow that to happen in terms of our preparation.
Is there, you still starting every meeting with like a couple of NIU clips?
I might use references. I don't know if I'm showing clips every meeting, but there's definitely a reference, I'm sure.
Hey, never waste a failure. That's for sure. Looking at this Indiana team, I know you're early in the process of evaluating what they do well. There's a lot that they do well. I've been pretty impressed just watching them throughout the year and studying their level of execution. They don't necessarily always check in some spots the size speed combination, but my goodness, they had a lot of good football players. So your evaluation of Indiana here in your early part of your preparation.
Well, I think they're a well-coached team that executes at a high level. They're a veteran team. They're an older team. I know not all those guys have been at Indiana, but they've played a lot of football. And it all starts with their quarterback, on offense, man. He makes great decisions. He takes care of the ball. He makes quick decisions, right? He knows where he wants to go with the ball, and he's usually going to put it right where it needs to be. They're doing a really good job running the football, too. And they got two good wideouts out there on the edges that are making a lot of the 50-50 balls. And so a lot of production, a lot of great execution on offense. Defensively, they're the number one rush defense in the country. And they do some unique things with their defensive line. They pressure. It's going to make you trust your rules, trust the things that you see, but also be able to recognize some tells that hopefully you see in film study. And so we're a firm believer, and you got to be able to run the football, right? And it's going to be a great challenge when you talk about a team that wants to run the football versus the number one rush defense in the country. And I think the other thing they do defensively well is they don't give up explosive plays. Right, they keep the ball in front of them. They're okay with sometimes being able to have vision and break and make a tackle. They're a good tackling unit, and they win the turnover margin. They take care of the football, and so there's a lot of good things that they do. And what they're asked to do, they do it really well.
Yeah, it's impressive to watch them. I think anyone that watches ball for a living, I mean, I don't care if a guy's 5'9", it doesn't really bother me, but if he plays his tail off, like, I respect the heck out of him. They got a couple guys like that. I really, really like watching them play. I know it'll be a great test for your guys. I know it's human nature, though. We talked about it. One of the first things we talked about, who's got the best path? I'm like, oh my gosh. It's a necessary evil, right? It's just one that is uncomfortable as someone that played. Yeah. So, looking at and just making sure you preach to the guys, hey, focus on this one. Let's not think about what's coming or the paths or who has this or who has that. How do you make sure your guys stay totally locked in on the opportunity that you have on Friday night as opposed to looking at what could be coming down the road?
Yeah. Greg, I would be lying if you say it's not human nature to naturally drift forward, no matter who the opponent is. Right. It's human nature to think about an uncertain future. I always tell our guys it's the thought after the thought, right? The minute you start thinking about an uncertain future, it's a reminder to get back into the moment and understand this is what we have right here, and what a great opportunity. You don't have to watch film long to know that we got a great opponent ahead of us. And for us, we know the example of, if you don't prepare for this opponent the right way, what's going to be the result. And so I have to make sure that noise is the loudest noise that's in their ears and in their head. And they got to make the decision to control the other noise, right? I told them yesterday in our meeting is that, if social media or text messages or all these different things are distracting you, you got to eliminate it. Right? You have to eliminate distractions so we can focus on elevating and getting better. Because, listen, our opponent is Indiana on Friday, but the challenge we have from now until we get ready for that game, to play that game, is to continue to elevate as a program, to continue to improve. Part of that improvement is preparing for an opponent, but we have to be a football program that is continuously getting better. We played well in November, but we got to play even better than we played in November, and that's going to be making sure that we eliminate distractions and we're intentional about the way we prepare.
It's pretty amazing how your team's been able to weather the storm. I think a lot of what we've talked about this year has been battling adversity, not just so much as inconsistent performance, but battling adversity because throughout a 16-game, 17-game schedule, the likelihood of you having some turnover or some attrition is real. You've lost two of your best players with Benjamin Morrison at corner, who I still think pound for pound is as good a cover corner as there is in the country. Boubacar Traore's been out. You've had some other challenges that you guys have had to overcome. So would you say your team, because of the way guys have stepped up, is maybe closer? How would you evaluate the way your team has dealt with adversity up to this point?
Yeah, this definitely is a close team. That's a little bit of a reflection of this place, right? In South Bend, Indiana, this is a school about 8,500 kids. There's not much to do other than be close to each other, and that's why I love being here. This is a close locker room that spends a lot of time with each other, but it also speaks to the volume of our depth, right? That we have a deep team, and I tell these guys all the time, you have to earn the trust of your teammates and your players well before somebody else watching the game or is calling the game recognizes you, right? And the media at some point will recognize you if you're doing it on the right way on the field, but you have to earn that respect in practice and earn that respect first from your teammates and your coaches. And so I hope that's a reflection of guys that ultimately got the opportunity to do it on Saturdays, maybe because of injury, but they earned the trust. We knew as coaches and players that they could do it on Saturday when it matters.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. Nick Saban on Sunday of the selection show said he believes that this national championship will be determined by teams that can control and dominate the line of scrimmage. You guys are a team that has always prized yourself on that. Offensive line has never been a concern. Defensive line the last handful of years has been as disruptive as just about any that you'll find. So do you view playoff success similarly to Nick Saban, where the team that owns the trenches will ultimately be victorious?
Absolutely. That's a formula that I believe throughout the year that you have to win, right? Is that you got to control the line of scrimmage. We always say we're an O-line, D-line driven program. And we got to make sure we stop the run and be able to run the ball. And it's magnified when you talk about playoff football. It's magnified when you really talk about playing a cold, a game with weather elements to it too. And that's something that even in my wisdom-seeking time of talking with Coach Tressel, my coach, Coach Tressel, who played and he won 4 national championships at Youngstown State, which has a playoff structure. And I just said, give me some wisdom. And one of the nuggets that he gave me is what you said, right, is that first down efficiency, but first down run efficiency on both sides of the ball are going to be important. Right, and the ability to control the line of scrimmage is going to give your team a great edge, and so that is parallel with the same statement that Coach Saban gave you.
Yeah, a couple great Jim Tressel stories. I'll say one quickly. They were running stretch zone. First play of the game, 8 yards. Second play of the game, 7 yards. Same play. Next play of the game, 11 yards. And Coach Mac gets on the headphone and said, Coach Tressel, do you have any other plays? Said, yes, sir, Coach. And as soon as they stop this one, we'll get to the next one. So first down efficiency, if you're gaining 6, 7, 8 yards a pop on stretch zone, over and over and over again. I know Mike Dembrock will do that as well. I want to ask you quickly about Mike before we put a bow on this thing. I absolutely love Mike Dembrock. I don't feel like I need to necessarily hide that. I think he's a phenomenal coach, but I like his temperament so much. How he deals with quarterbacks, how there's always a sliver of positivity. He can rip you and yet be smiling. And I love that. And I think that's a really important relationship skill to have with dealing with the modern day player. So now that you've brought him in and all the success that you guys have experienced running the football and on the offensive side, is he everything you thought he'd be and more? How would you assess that relationship?
Well, I was fortunate that me and Mike Dembrock worked together at Cincinnati for 4 years. And when you spend time with somebody, you get to know who they really are, right? And if we spend one day together, you might be at your highest of highs or the lowest of lows. I don't know. But when you talk about spending years together, you know who that person is because they're consistently that person. And I knew when we had a chance to hire him, what he could bring to this football program. I think you said it best. The leadership aspect of being our offensive coordinator is his greatest trait. And he is an innovative mind. He works really well with others and uses their wisdom and collaborative effort. But the greatest thing Mike Dembrock possesses is his leadership. And leaders are able to figure out what each player needs. Right? Not all of them need the exact same thing from their offensive coordinator. And Coach Dembrock does a wonderful job at that and has done a really good job in his first year leading our offense.
Yeah, he's been awesome, man. It's been fun to watch him. I would ask you about Coach Golden, but we all know how great he is. That goes without saying. He doesn't get any more love from us. We've been singing his praises for a very long time, and he deserves every ounce of praise that he receives. We'll get you out of here with this, Coach. I mean, South Bend, Indiana. First ever home playoff game, kicking off the new 12-team format, 29 degrees at kick, which is balmy, I feel like. Might need to wear some short sleeves. We'll see how tough you are. We'll find out. What can we anticipate? I mean, you've been there a long time now. What do you think that atmosphere will look like?
Well, I'll tell you this. I won't be in short sleeves because I have a saying around here. I said there's no such thing as a cold, tough guy, right? You're either warm or you're cold, right? One or the other. And if you're cold with you got short sleeves on, you're not a cold, tough guy. You're just cold. And so I'm going to make sure I'm prepared. Our guys will be prepared. But what an environment it's going to be, right? You think about the history of Notre Dame football, the history of the crazy games, the historic games that have been played in Notre Dame Stadium, and to say we're a part of the first playoff game ever at Notre Dame Stadium is something that humbles you. You're grateful to be a part of it. I've challenged our crowd to truly impact the game. As a quarterback, I know as being a head coach, like the crowd can truly impact a game. It can impact an offense in terms of, trying to make them go on a different cadence, have to go on silent count. It impacted us in a negative way. I think last year at Duke, we had like 4 or 5 false starts. And even this year at Texas A&M, it challenges you to go on silent count, but be efficient offensively. So our crowd has to make sure they're impacting the game more than just enjoying the game. But it's something that we're all going to be grateful to be a part of.
I think they'll be ready to rock and roll. And Kurt Signe did say that the crowd noise did give him some fits at Ohio State. So maybe just taking something that he's said outwardly that maybe can apply to maybe giving you guys an advantage, which you've now earned by getting that home field playoff game. So, Coach, congratulations on a tremendous, tremendous season. We couldn't be happier for you, and we can't tell you how excited we are to be there, not necessarily alongside you, but in a nice, warm, comfortable booth environment upstairs, watching you guys play in the first ever college football playoff game. Thanks for the time, brother.
All right, man. Enjoy it up there in that booth.
Now moving into a little transfer portal conversation after a terrific chat with our good friend Marcus Freeman. Look forward to being on the call alongside Sean McDonough and Molly McGrath on Friday for that game in South Bend. Should be very interesting. Indiana and Notre Dame. We will break that thing down and all the games coming up this weekend here on an edition of Always College Football a little later in the week. But the portal, here's where we're at right now. There have been 1,500 players that have entered the transfer portal this cycle so far, over 1,500. That number growing on a daily basis, several of which guys that are still on college football playoff rosters that have entered in. Don't know where they're going to end up or when they're going to enroll. Are they even available in some cases? If that doesn't explain to you how much of a disaster, and when I'm telling you a disaster, that the portal calendar is, then I don't know what else to tell you. I know we got to line things up with academia, but guys, you're telling kids they can't compete for their team for a college football playoff run because they have to enroll or else they won't have a chance to enroll later on. Like, come on, man, what are we doing? Can't we figure this out? Let's let common sense figure this out, okay? 1,500 players are in. The crazy thing about this portal cycle is that 31%, as of this moment, 31% of the players that have entered have already transferred at one point in their career. The more interesting part of it is that some of the time, when you have multiple time transfers, it's usually because a guy has a degree. Or, hey, I finished up, I can move freely, I have more flexibility when I've already graduated. That's not the case this year. When you look at this year, there are a lot more guys that are transferring without their degree, 18% to be exact, for a second time, than even a year ago, that was 11%. So that number's going up. And I don't know when it ends. Will it just continue to go up and up and up? Well, probably. I mean, the NCAA basically said our hands are tied. There's nothing we can do about this. You can essentially transfer as often as you want. So I wouldn't anticipate this thing getting ironed out anytime soon. It feels like the numbers are going to go up and up and up and up and up, and we'll see when it eventually slows down. There are a bunch of examples too, by the way, and it's still early. We will look at the numbers after the fact. There's a lot of guys that are leaving good situations in favor of what might be better situations, only to find out that the grass is not greener on the other side. And in some cases, they end up having to walk on places because there was not a scholarship waiting for them on the other side. There's a lot of bad actors right now in the transfer portal world. There's a lot of agents that are taking as much as 20% of what these kids are making. And there's a lot of people that are getting really bad advice. So we'll clean all that up after the fact. But right now, let's talk a little bit on some of the big targets in the portal. Several have landed. The portal is a lot about quarterbacks, right? It's a lot about quarterbacks. And this year, it's about wide receivers. Those are the two headliner positions. I would walk you through all the important offensive linemen and the offensive linemen and the defensive linemen, the guys along the trenches that are a huge priority to these schools, but I don't think you're going to know who they are. Unless you follow recruiting, you probably don't know, oh, well, yeah, I remember that guy. Yeah, I know that guy. I remember that name. He went there. But oftentimes recruiting, when it comes to offensive linemen, it's a little bit hit or miss to begin with. Defensive linemen, too, there are some guys that move the needle, but several of which have skills and traits, but maybe they don't have the production. So a lot of our focus will be on players that you're likely going to know. You've probably heard that name, whether you watched them last year or you remember them throughout the recruiting process. Let's start at quarterback. That's where a lot of movement's already started to go down. I think, too, part of the quarterback musical chairs that goes on is that guys don't always wait as often as they probably should. The longer you wait, the more leverage you might have. But the longer you wait, the likelihood of multiple opportunities starts to dry up. So when you see a guy, for example, like Darian Mensah from Tulane, he goes in the portal. There's a bunch of people super interested in Mensah. But are they more interested in Mensah than they are Miller Moss? Are they more interested in Mensah than they are Jackson Arnold? Are they more interested in Mensah than they are Thomas Castellanos? I don't know the answer to that. So oftentimes these guys land a good situation. They go, they pull the trigger, they work out the NIL details, they get the job done. So I think it's unique for some guys because it's hard to figure out, all right, where am I on the pecking order? If you're the obvious number one overall guy in the portal and quarterback, then it's pretty simple. You have your pick of the litter. You have a bunch of suitors come in, you evaluate, you take your visits, you go and meet with each individual coach. Here's my development plan for you, what have you. But with quarterbacks, it's a little tricky because they're recruiting probably 3 or 4 at a time. And for instance, last week at Auburn, you have 2 guys on campus at the same time, Jackson Arnold and Malik Murphy. Well, they're using those 2 guys against each other. Jackson Arnold ends up saying, yeah, I'll come. Done. Malik, we appreciate all that you've done to get here to visit with us in person, but we're going to be going with Jackson Arnold. So it's a really interesting dynamic that is currently existing in the sport. But here's a couple guys that have already figured out where they're going. Miller Moss is heading to Louisville from USC. I think it's a really, really good and mutually beneficial decision for Miller Moss and for Louisville. Miller Moss, let's look at it from his perspective. He's coming from SC, was benched there towards the end of the year. Bunch of turnovers there at times. And that's part of the reason why I think they got away from him a little bit, but still really encouraged by what I saw at times. Like first year as a starting quarterback, showed decisiveness, showed accuracy, can win from the pocket, sneaky mobility, a lot of stuff that you like when evaluating his prospects down the road. And then from the other side of the coin for Miller Moss, man, I've seen what Jeff Brom has done in his tenure working with transfer quarterbacks, whether it's Jack Plummer, whether it was Tyler Shuck last year. Both guys had outstanding seasons with Louisville. The other thing, too, look at the weapons that Louisville has had in the past. I would imagine they'll have weapons comparable to what they've had in the past. This is a quarterback-friendly offense with a guy calling the plays that played the position. Really like this fit for Miller Moss and for Louisville as well. We'll go next to Connor Weigman, who's heading from Texas A&M to Houston. Highly recruited prospect, has played well at times for the Aggies, but last year there were times he didn't play so well either. Against A&M, not so great. Obviously, against Missouri, if I knew I was going to get that version of Connor Weigman every week, feel great about bringing him to my school and putting him in a position to be the starting quarterback. But I also felt like there were some ebbs and flows in his track record, and there is a bit of an injury history. So I think it's nice that he's ended up at Houston. We'll be curious to see exactly what style of attack Houston's going to employ, but at least Weigman's kind of close to home and understands, having played football in the state of Texas in the past, he knows what College Station was like. This will be a little less pressure, a little bit less of a platform, but still an opportunity to go secure a starting job and prove what you can prove. Darian Mensah, already talked about him. He's going from Tulane to Duke to replace Malik Murphy, who is still currently in the portal. More on him here in just a minute. Thomas Castellanos transferred from Boston College. Quit on Boston College, left lost his starting job, went in the portal immediately, and now has decided to head to Florida State. I think it's a really good fit for Florida State and for new offensive coordinator Gus Malzahn. Thomas Castellano started his career at UCF, but we've seen at times, especially against Florida State last year, remember in 2023, not 2024, in 2023, they played early in the season. I think it was week 3. How many yards rushing did Thomas Castellanos have against what was an elite defensive front seven for Florida State in 2023? The group that went undefeated, made the ACC, won the ACC, and was left out of the playoff. That defense was incredible. Look what Thomas Castellanos did to that defense in their game and their narrow victory over the Boston College Eagles. I think the fit is good. It's good that Castellanos will stay in the ACC as far as familiarity with the league. And I think he has a chance to kind of turn things around and resurrect what was once a very promising career. Devin Dampier is heading from New Mexico to Utah. This will be very interesting because if you look at Utah in the past, Utah has not been a team that's going to employ quarterback mobility as much as it's likely going to employ it with Devin Dampier. This guy's electric with the ball in his hands. Really exciting player to watch, really fun, can keep things alive, can run around and create and buy time like crazy, but can kill you with his legs from time to time as well. So an interesting fit here, but a guy that I'm glad to now see have an opportunity to take his game to the highest levels of the sport there in the Power 5. I think it should be very interesting. Michael Van Buren's transferring from Mississippi State to LSU. Showed some promise there in his first year at Mississippi State. Kind of thrust into a difficult spot. Blake Shapen gets hurt. Van Buren gets the nod and had some really bright spots. But now, here as a young player, it was hard in a starting role to really focus on yourself. Focus on the things and the tendencies and the details with his mechanics. It's hard to focus on those when you're focusing on preparing for the opponent. Now he'll be able to revert back to a backup role behind Garrett Nussmeier at LSU, focus on his own mechanics, and then hopefully when he gets the chance in 2026 to become the starting quarterback or compete for the starting job, he'll be really well equipped to go and do a nice job in that offense. It's a really fun offense to watch and a fun offense to play in if you are a quarterback. And then one of the biggest fish in the portal to land so far is Jackson Arnold. Referenced him a moment ago. He's going from Oklahoma to Auburn. And I love the fit here for Jackson Arnold, and I love the play by Auburn. I feel like you are buying Jackson Arnold right now as low as humanly possible. Like, if we're thinking about stocks and trading stocks, think about what Jackson Arnold would have gone for from a stock standpoint before the 2024 season. Now think about what he's probably going to go for, right? As far as stocks are concerned, not going to go very high, right? There were some bright moments, ran for 131 yards against Alabama in the second to last game of the regular season. I also think the other thing I like about Jackson Arnold, when he was relieved of his starting duties by Michael Hawkins, he didn't pull a Thomas Castellanos and say, yeah, I'm done. No, he said, I'm going to put my head down. I'm going to keep working. I'm going to burn a red shirt later in the season when I retain my starting job from Michael Hawkins. That, I think, garnered a lot of respect amongst his teammates, and hopefully that will translate over to Auburn where he can resurrect his career. The thing I'll say also about Jackson Arnold, when you talk to people that have seen him throw, people swear by him. I have not seen him in person, but I've been talking to several people that are very familiar with what he did at the high school level and what he's done in camp or behind closed doors at the practice. He was not good in camp last year. It was forcing it, was trying to do too much. Turnovers became a huge problem and eventually was shut down because of the turnovers and did some decent things down the stretch for Oklahoma. The turnovers will be the biggest problem, but this is going to be a rebuild, not just in mechanics for Hugh Freeze, but a rebuild as far as mentality is concerned. Jackson Arnold's lost all his confidence, or at least a vast majority of what confidence he had going into the college game. If you can build that back and he can start to cash in on some of the hype that he had coming in as a recruit, this could be a perfect situation for Jackson Arnold to get things going in the right direction. 5 guys still in the portal that I think are still highly coveted according to many people. Fernando Mendoza from Cal. Big, looks the part. I think a lot of people very interested in entertaining the possibility of bringing him in. Malik Murphy at Duke is still out there. Bo Pribula from Penn State, really mobile option, had some bright moments coming off the bench in relief for Drew Aller this past year, so we'll keep an eye on that. Luke Kromenhoek from Florida State. I know a lot of people really like his game. And then Caden Salter, still in the portal from Liberty. A lot of people thought he'd have a home by now, but it hasn't materialized just yet. So we're keeping an eye on those guys, and we'll keep you posted as things move forward. Running back, not quite as deep as I anticipated coming into the season. Thought there'd be a lot of guys in the portal from a running back spot. There's a few. Justice Haynes from Alabama is the biggest name at the moment. Justice Haynes was a very highly touted prospect coming out and has had a pretty good start to his career at Alabama, but it was more in a situational role. I think a lot of teams will be trying to get in line to entertain bringing Justice Haynes to their spot. They've done a really good job, really encouraged by where things are going with Justice Haynes. But I think there might be more in there too. If he becomes a bell cow type of back, maybe something works out for him. Number 2 is Fluff Bothwell. South Alabama, he's kind of a bowling ball type of player, but super productive for the Jags there in Mobile. Another guy I continue to hear a lot of good things on is Ahmad Hardy from Louisiana Monroe. Sounds like a lot of teams are very interested in potentially bringing him in. They could be a 3-down back and a guy that could have some success. Another guy that people are super curious about is Quentin Joyner, who is from Austin, Texas originally, signed at USC, but had a unique combination of skills back in high school where he excelled in track as well. Ran 10.9 in the 100, but also threw the shot put. So a size-speed combination that you like, but he hasn't exactly showcased the ability to be a 3-down back where he can be a capable receiver out of the backfield, but a highly productive back coming out of Austin that should have a very bright future. And then Wayshawn Parker of Washington State is another guy. He was named Pac-12 Freshman of the Year last year. That's right, Pac-12 Freshman of the Year. Washington State, there's only 2 teams, maybe a small pool, but he was really, really solid. Went for over 700 yards on the ground on just 137 carries, so about 5.5 yards per carry. He also had 4 touchdowns as well. So we'll keep an eye on where those guys go and keep you posted. And then perhaps the best position right now in the transfer portal is probably wide receiver. Barryon Brown has already announced that he'll be going to LSU from Kentucky. Unbelievable juice, tremendous in the return game. But the one problem with Barryon Brown is that he has been very inconsistent. He's had drop issues in the past. The route running has been inconsistent, but he's got a lot of game. Now, if they can just improve his consistency at LSU, he could be very difficult to defend. Kevin Coleman is transferring from Mississippi State to Missouri, a guy with a lot of speed, but not a ton of length, but a good fit for what Missouri likely wants to be offensively. Micah Hudson, top blue chip recruit out of Texas Tech, has now going to be heading to Texas A&M. 5-star guy, didn't really see the field very much last year, just 8 catches for 123 yards. But I think people are intrigued with his height, with his length, and with his upside there, and hopefully A&M can get the most out of him. There's still a bunch of big names that are still in the portal. Eric Singleton from Georgia Tech, a ridiculous amount of speed, a catch-and-run guy, and a deep threat that everybody's after. Probably the top guy in the portal regardless of position. Sounds like he's getting a really, really strong look from Ole Miss. If he ends up going in that direction, I'm not sure it would surprise anybody given the offense that they'd likely to run. He'd probably be a pretty good fit there. But I know everybody wants a piece of Eric Singleton. We'll see where he ends up. Dane Key from Kentucky, the most reliable weapon in Kentucky's offense. He's big, he's physical, not crazy top-end speed, but extremely reliable. This would be a piece that I would probably not come in and bring in and expect him to be the number 1 guy, but my number 1 possession guy, Dane Key, has a chance to be that and be a super productive weapon for whoever brings him in. KC Concepcion, as far as football players are concerned, pound for pound, he's as good as just about anybody in the portal right now. You can line him up at running back. You can use him in the return game. You can use him in the slot receiver. You can use him as a gadget type of player. And I think with where he's continued to develop, he'll become a little bit more capable of playing outside and having success outside at some point. We'll see where he ends up. Had a great year statistically from his freshman season, but it didn't really carry over into his sophomore year. Quarterback inconsistency has been a challenge and kind of hindering his upside, I think, in the eyes of many. Deuce Robinson at USC. There is not a bigger, more physical freak in this group than Deuce Robinson, 6'6". He was a tight end recruit coming out, has played wide receiver the last couple of years. Would not be surprised if he's utilized as a pass-catching tight end that could become a matchup nightmare. And then finally, Nick Anderson at Oklahoma, who had a bit of an unfortunate campaign here in 2024, really battled an injury all season long, got to play very little, did have a breakout season in 23, so we know it's in there. It's just about getting it to the surface and getting him back on the field 100% of the time. Now, moving on to a coaching hire last week that sent shockwaves throughout the college football world. You might think, depending on where you're at, maybe it was Rich Rodriguez who reunites with West Virginia. We kind of told you that could happen if you were with us last week. But the big mover last week was Bill Belichick taking the head coaching job at North Carolina. Bill Belichick, having coached in the NFL for 49 years, replaces Mac Brown, who at 6 seasons there in Chapel Hill had some pockets of success that were pretty impressive. But he was fired on November 26th. Out with the old, in with the new. Bill Belichick steps in. He turned 73 in April. Here's what I think not enough people are talking about with this hire. People are talking about, will it work? Will it have success? Will he do this? Will he win this? Can he relate to the modern player? Can he create a culture of competitiveness? All that's fine. Okay, all that's great. He's a great coach. No one's ever going to push back on that. And I don't know how comfortable he's going to be dealing with college players. I don't know the answer to that. All I know is that college players and the contracts surrounding college players very different from that of what you deal with in the NFL. So, for instance, you have a top flight wide receiver that goes out, has 4 great games in the first 4 games of the year. He gets, let's say, ACC player the week before the bye week. And then right there, the week of the bye week, he's played 4 games. He's going to go into the head coach's office. He's going to tell the head coach, Coach, hey, things have really gone well for me so far this year. But, I could redshirt if you guys don't pay me what I deserve. And here's what I think I deserve. I don't know how Bill Belichick's going to react to that. That's a different world. That's very strange. And in the NFL, it's pretty cut and dry. You signed what you signed. You play for what you play for. If you don't want to be here, fine, we'll cut you. And you won't get $1 because you didn't do what you were asked to do. NFL is very simple like that. College, a little bit more complex because you not only have to deal with the player, but you deal with the player's family. You deal with fallout at the player's high school. You deal with fallout with the player's friends and losing guys on the team and how that could have an effect on you and the ripple effect in the locker room. That's also another area of interest. But the reason why North Carolina did this wasn't, I don't think, to go out and win championships, ACC title games, national championships. The reason why North Carolina did this is because they are now front page news. Just about every day I go on the internet and I can find some type of headliner story about Bill Belichick, what he's done, the player that he was able to lock down, the quarterback that he just locked down that was like the 193rd ranked prospect in the country. We're not writing that story if John Doe takes over at North Carolina. No one's writing that story. No one's reading that story. With all due respect to, say, John Summerall at Tulane, he takes the North Carolina job. They might cover the press conference, but I can tell you what they're probably not going to do. They're not going to cut away from SportsCenter and follow that press conference in its entirety with commentary on the front end and the back end. There's no disrespect to John Summerall. It's just an acknowledgement of how the media machine will rally around Bill Belichick. Not that dissimilar to the way the media machine rallied around Deion Sanders. In the time that he took over at Colorado, every single thing he's done has been front page news, to the point in which some people have been frustrated by it, which is fine. Feel however you want to feel. But you can't you cannot sit and tell me that Deion Sanders doesn't move the needle in one direction or the other. Bill Belichick will do the same. And while I don't think it's going to be quite the same, because I do think there's a phenomenon surrounding Deion Sanders and being prime and going about it in a different way with how he uses social media, with how he has a brash, no nonsense, unapologetic way of leading his team. There is something about that that's very different. The media surrounding it, the television surrounding it, all these other things. But I do look at Bill Belichick and the amount of coverage that he receives. I could see it being somewhat comparable. I could see it being somewhat comparable, which is why I think that North Carolina will join a lot of the teams throughout this offseason as one of those teams that everybody's really curious about. I don't know if he's going to necessarily be as popular, and we won't generate at our show as many views off North Carolina as we do on Georgia or Notre Dame or USC or Ohio State. Like, we know the numbers. We know our algorithm. We know what programs we get the most viewership from. Alabama, Texas A&M. We know. Basically, we know what hits to play. All right. But what we don't know is how North Carolina is going to move the needle moving forward. And what we will figure out is that while North Carolina will probably be in a lot more shows between now and when we kick things off in Labor Day, but I still wonder if this is going to have a lasting impact on how North Carolina is covered. That's why they did it. There's no denying that. They're now front page news. But will it continue on the same way it continued on for Deion Sanders throughout the course of his first season? Because I remember when Deion Sanders started 4-0, it was great. They lose to Oregon and the wheels fall off. And the amount of viewership and interest that Colorado got down the stretch wasn't great. Would that be the same thing for North Carolina? Because I do think early on there's going to be a certain level of intrigue. There's going to be people watching because they're fascinated to see how it's going to work. If they end up 3-2 at the midway point, will you still be watching in November? That's what I think a lot of people are going to be really curious about. So we'll see. I think it's interesting. I think it makes sense because North Carolina is now front page news. But will they stay front page news? Probably not unless they have legitimate success. That'll do it for us here at Always College Football. For all of us here, we encourage all of you to like, rate, and subscribe to the show, wherever you get the show. If you are new to us here at ACF, check us out on the ESPN College Football YouTube page. You can also download our podcast wherever you get the podcast. Check in with us here in a couple days. We're going to do a full preview and breakdown of all the big-time playoff matchups, and then we'll dive into a couple of intriguing bowl games as well. But we do the best previews in college football media, so make sure you lock in and check with us a little bit later in the week. Our previews aren't like, well, this quarterback's good, this quarterback's average, we'll take the good quarterback. They're not like that. We dive a little bit deeper in the weeds, and we think that you guys will like them if you like college football. So for all of us here at ACF, for Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, I'm Greg. We hope you have an amazing day, and remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.